The Sales Proformance Show, your source of inspiration in the world of sales and business development. Here we blend cutting-edge sales strategies with personal development, helping you achieve not just professional success, but also personal fulfillment. You'll hear from the experts to help unlock your true potential. And now here's your host, David Sliman.
Welcome back to the show, everybody. I'm your host, Dave Sliman, and I am thrilled to introduce our guest today. As you all know, this show is about our listeners, and we talk about sales, business development, personal development, and today's show is going to be about sales acceleration, upping your sales game. And our guest is a seasoned sales trainer, coach, industry professional, speaker, has his own podcast show, Why in the Buy. He's got a huge track record of transforming sales organizations and sales leaders and sales professionals. And we're going to hear from the best today. So whether you're a seasoned sales veteran, or you've been doing this for a little while, or you're thinking about getting into the sales, this is going to be the podcast for you. And luckily enough for me, I started following this guy about a year ago, and he puts out such great content. What I like most about what he puts out is he's very process oriented. He's realistic in his approaches, and he can apply them. And I'm telling you what, this is going to be a special one. So without further ado, Jeff Bajorek, welcome to the Sales Proformance Podcast Show.
Well, thanks for having me, Dave. You said the best was joining us today. Who else is going to be here? I'm looking around.
I'm telling you, this guy's dynamite. This is going to be packed with some great sales perspectives. And today's show is going to be about educating. And I know you've got a sales history, and I want to touch on that. But for our listeners out there, can you give everybody a 10,000-foot view of your background and how you even got into sales?
I got a degree in sports medicine and athletic training, and I got into sales reluctantly. So a technical background, not begrudgingly, but reluctantly falling into sales like I think a lot of people did. I don't know very many people who, when they're 9 years old say, I want to be in sales when I grow up. Right. And, the more that I have sold, the more I got involved and really started paying attention to what it really means to sell. The more I recognize that selling is not about transacting money. It is about the way you interact with people. It's about the way you ask for things. It's about the way you earn things. It's about the way you think about what's in it for the other person whenever you ask for something. Yeah. And if you removed the financial component of the quote unquote sale, how would that change your view on how you interact with people on a day-to-day basis? That's something that I've been really thinking about for the last several years as I find ways to help more people relate to the four-letter word that really has five letters in it called sales. So there's really an aspect of changing and shifting perspectives that I try to bring with me to my client engagements and really to just anybody who wants to talk about this stuff. Yeah. And then I try to expand that or expound upon that in my training, coaching, and speaking engagements. I want to get people to think a little bit differently about what they do.
Right. I think you touched on this, I know you have, about putting the value in being in sales. There's people who, I'm in sales, and they don't give themselves enough credibility. And I just got to tell you, sales is an art. It's an art form. It's a craft. And I for some reason, there's this connotation in some respects where they don't give themselves enough credibility in being in sales.
Keep unpacking that for me. Yeah. What do you mean enough credibility? I think I know where you're going, but I don't want this jumping off point to be a poor assumption. So what go further.
Yeah. The credibility of, oh, this is just sales, or you're just trying to sell me something, right? The idea of selling somebody something, but the whole credibility of doing that, I think that's where I'm trying to go with it.
I think when you're in sales, you realize that you do things for other people that they need.
Yeah.
And hopefully you do it in a way that nobody else can do it, which will lead to a solution that no one else can provide. So when you think about the value that you create as someone who just sells something, like, what do you mean? Why are you selling yourself short? Give yourself some credit. And again, it's I have this. I grew up in a family that didn't really trust salespeople all that much. We don't have very many salespeople in the family. When I told my mom that I was going to start a sales training business, she said, "Are you sure you want to do that?" And I said, "Well, yeah, why?" She said, "Well, aren't you afraid that none of your friends are ever going to want to hang out with you anymore?" And I said, "No."
That's exactly what I'm trying to get to right there.
So, when I think about why I started my business, and when anybody who is listening to this thinks about why do you sell what you sell? Why do you work where you work? You have a choice. And when you think about the reasons you choose and you really dig into the value you create, the value you provide, the perspective that you have that's unique, there's a role for all of that. And people can appreciate that. They kind of think, oh, all right, well, yeah, I guess you can kind of say that. And I guess I kind of believe you. But most people, I think, are very reductive in what selling is. And they reduce it to, well, I provide something. And in exchange, I take people's money from them.
Yes.
And it's like, well, hold on. And I don't want to be so trite as to say, well, would you do it for free? I'll tell you what, I give away a lot of my time for free. So yes, I would. But you don't have to be that person that gives it away for free. But why aren't you doing something that you love doing? Yeah. And you mentioned at the top of the show, focusing on process. Like if you fall in love with the work, the results will come. If you're just falling in love with the results, it's really hard to do the work.
That's a great point, man.
Ultimately, that credit, that credibility, I think comes down to not just your belief in yourself, but your belief in the value of what you do. And if you really understand the value in what you do, if you believe in the value that you can create with what you do, and you start to have a different outlook, the money becomes secondary. It's not just a profession, it's a craft. It's not just a profession, It's a vocation. It's something you're called to do. And I just have to say, look, if you're not called to do this, why are you doing it? Why would you do anything?
Why would you do it?
And that's perhaps a bigger conversation, Dave, but that's
that's
what drives what I do.
Yep. It's a craft, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that's the big separator and what I was trying to go with that. And I think you hit it right on the head. Listen, you and I have been in sales for a long time. We've coached a number of people. We've worked with a number of organizations. There's a DNA makeup for people who are successful in this business. And can you lay out or identify some of the successful DNA makeups of somebody who's a strong sales professional versus the ones who are weaker?
Passion, belief, patience, purpose. That's probably 80% of the list.
Yeah.
I'm not going to say that you have to be outgoing.
Yep.
I'm not going to say you have to be, you have to have the gift of gab. I think in order to be very good, you also need to be comfortable with conflict, not necessarily confrontation, but you need to be comfortable with conflict, because in conflict or through conflict comes insights. But also there are going to be bumps in the road, and there are going to be times when some of your prospects or your customers are a little more confrontational than you would like them to be. And you cannot back away from them just because you can't back down from your customers because you're afraid of conflict. If you're backing down from your customers because you're afraid of your customers, that's another issue altogether. But you have to be willing to stand up for what you believe in. And that's where the comfortable with conflict part comes from.
Yeah.
And Challenger as a model is widely misunderstood and then misused. I don't think you should go out trying to ruffle people's feathers in order to make, but you should definitely be willing to point to illustrate a point of view and present a point of view that is in some conflict with the status quo or the norm. Because that's how you get people's attention, and that's how you change their eye level. It's interesting. I say this in front of audiences. I say this with clients, and I'll stand up at the front of the room and say, look, during this workshop, whatever it is, the next 4 or 8 hours that we're going to spend together, I am going to say some things that you may not agree with. I invite you to raise your hand and challenge me on that, because I know I'm not wrong. And I get this like, wait, what? And I said, look, and I'm not telling you that you're wrong. What I'm telling you is the stuff I'm going to present to you is tried, true, and proven. And there are first principles underlying all of them. If you don't understand them, it doesn't mean that the way you came up, the way that you started selling, the way that you've learned to be successful is wrong. What it means is that the truth is actually somewhere in between. And if you bring your point of view to me, and I'm, in between the two of us, we're able to marry our 2 points of view to get a slightly different perspective on what the truth is.
Yeah.
I said, then we all just got better.
It's so true, man.
I'm inviting conflict at the front to give people the permission to disagree with me, because if they're not disagreeing with me, I'm doing something wrong.
Right.
And through that conflict, which is different from a confrontation, I want to be clear from that. I'm not going chest to chest with anybody in any of my rooms, right. But through that conflict, we can get better. And that's the whole point of the engagements that I participate in.
That's great, man. I'm going to, because you sparked something for me, and with my engagements, I really like to open it up and say, listen, there are some things that I'm going to say that you're going to go, man, I've heard that before. I tried that before. And for some reason I got away from doing it. It worked for me, got away from doing it. Then there's a second silo where people are going to go, just what you said. You know what, Dave, you're off your rocker. That's just not going to work for me. That's just not my deal. And then there's other things. What I want them to take away in the third silo is this. That sounds really good. That sounds really interesting. I'm going to give that a shot. Mm-hmm. I'm going to try that. I'm going to take a chance, and I'm going to put that out there, and I'm going to work the process, and I'm going to give it a shot. So those are the 3 things that I always try to take away. And I think that's why we've got very similar alignment on this stuff. But you talked about conflict, right? That's how you get better. Objections, you putting yourself in, get comfortable being uncomfortable. That's how you learn and you grow as a professional in any space, whether you're an athlete or whether you're in sales or whatever it may be. But ultimately what it comes down to is, conflict is good if you can handle it and grow from it. And ultimately, I think that was a great point. All right, next question. Listen, I'm a guy who's like an all-in mentality, right? And you work with a lot of sales professionals these days, and the ones who are leading the charge, are usually, or are on the top, are usually a smaller percentage than the whole force that we make up, either as a company or maybe even sales across the country for that matter. But these days, how can sales professionals really be all in on their craft? Because we talked about the craft earlier. Is it a leadership issue? Is it a cultural issue across all boards? But how can sales professionals be more in tune with being all in on their craft?
What do you mean by all in?
I'm talking about doing the work, man.
Do you mean commitment?
Yeah.
Or do you mean development?
Both. I'm talking a combination of both. I'm talking about, 1, ultimately being committed, jumping in, and 2, what are the things that they can do to improve themselves?
Okay. First of all, everything begins and ends with belief. And I write a lot, talk a lot about what I call the sales success cycle. The belief leads to success. And when you can have success in alignment with your integrity, that is going to instill more belief, because you really get behind, the alignment between, when I say integrity, I mean the alignment between what you sell, who you sell it to, how you sell it, and why. And so that is where belief really comes from. From a commitment standpoint, if you believe that you do something worth doing, that you solve problems worth solving, and that you have a unique perspective that helps people solve problems in ways that lead to outcomes that no one else can create, then you've got something worth going to market with.
Yeah.
That's from a commitment standpoint. That's a very reduced, version of a lot of talking points, but that's pretty succinct. From a development standpoint, I think you have to have a combination of ego. It has to be, you have to have enough ego to believe in yourself, that you're worth doing this work, that you're worth improving upon. But you can't have so much ego that you don't realize that you always have something to learn. And I could call that the combination of ego and curiosity. Because ego is this belief that you're worth pursuing, or that it's worth pursuing, that you're worth investing in. And curiosity is an admittance that you might be wrong. And when you realize, and you're mindful enough to recognize that you're doing well, but there's always some place where you could do a little bit better. And I don't mean in a self-deprecating way. I mean, like, okay, if there was one thing holding me back, and I'm really paying attention to all the goods and bads and in-betweens in my everyday activities, in my routines, in my schedules, and my disciplines, where is there room to optimize? You have to be mindful in that moment and think about those things, and then be willing to pursue them.
Yeah.
So I think, I don't know if that gives you a specific enough answer to your question, but I think, when we're talking about commitment and then we're talking about development, that belief is what underscores that commitment, and belief is what underscores a big part of your development. You just have to counter that with the reality that you're not perfect.
Yeah, that's it. And I think the bigger thing is self-awareness, right? And analyze. It's really hard to analyze yourself. And one of the things I did early in my career, I was lucky enough to be coached to do this, was record myself. And I was talking about this last week on another podcast, right? Literally recording a presentation early in my career. You want to talk about painful?
Excruciating.
Oh, but you want to talk about leaps in progress versus steps in progress. It changed the direction of my career as a whole, because I took the time to, and in those days, okay, dating myself, and we were using cassette tapes. Okay. I had a cassette tape I had in my presentation folder that I recorded. And then when I was done, I sent it to the mentor at my time, and he listened to it. He's like, "Do you know what you're doing?" And I said, "No, I have absolutely no idea what I'm doing right now." No, he goes, "Do you know what you're doing in your presentation?" And every time I got to price, my voice and my confidence would just drop. My presentation was great. Discovery step was great. Presentation was great. I get to price and I go, oh. And the confidence would just exude out of me. You could hear it. But those are some of the things, from a development standpoint, since you brought that up, that I think are really key, really key.
The best practice that has helped me become a better salesman, hands down, is writing. And writing leads to the recording. And then the recording lends itself to listening back. I tell other people, and say, yeah, I don't listen to my recordings. I don't listen to my own podcast. I was there the first time. That's good. I've moved on. But the hidden truth in there is that, and it's not just like, I'm used to the sound of my own voice right now. It doesn't creep me out like it used to. Like, you hear it all the time. I get it. It's not so cringy as the kids like to say today. But going back and listening to what I say, how I say it, when I say it, I edited The Why and the Buy for the first season and a half. And I learned a lot about my filler words. I learned a lot about my tendencies. I learned a lot about my partner's filler words and her tendencies. And I was able to really be more aware and more mindful of those in the moment. And what I will go back to about writing, because it underscores all of this, and to reference conflict and to reference just awareness and things like that. When you write a blog or even just a post on LinkedIn, you have to say something that is edgy enough to get people's attention, but also defensible. And now all of a sudden, you're creating that conflict yourself.
Yeah.
You're trying to respond to and answer all the thousands of voices that could pick this thing apart. And in a way, as I think about it right now too, kind of stream of consciousness here, Dave,
Yeah.
I'm choosing which one of those or which handful of those voices I'm willing to argue with and who I'm not. And so in that way, you're holding yourself to such a high level of scrutiny. You can't help but get better. You can't help but fortify your own talking points. You can't help but believe just a little bit more in what you said. Because if you don't believe it, you're not pressing publish.
Yes.
And so there's that part, right? The writing part, right? But you're absolutely right. To your point about recording your calls and going back and watching those presentations and like, when and spend a little extra time when you watch that Zoom call over and you see your prospect's eyes roll back in their head and think about what you were saying and how you were saying it. And I think a lot of people focus on the wrong things when they listen to their sales calls. They're worried about the ums and the ahs and the filler words. I don't have a problem with those, as long as they come from a place of genuine, like, I'm thinking through a problem right now. Like when you're thinking through a problem with a colleague, with an advisor, with a friend, you use filler words all the time because you're trying to communicate the point that there are so many things running through your head and so many possibilities. And it's like that line, the lines of code from the Matrix or like, from The Hangover where, you see Zach Galifianakis' character and he's kind of running through counting cards and everything. Like you can see that stuff constantly going through your head. Ums and ahs demonstrate your passion. That's a good thing. When ums and ahs demonstrate a lack of preparation, it's a bad thing. So don't focus on the stutter. Focus on the environment in which the stutter happened. Are you engaged and you just can't speak as quickly as you can think? Or did you show up unprepared and now you feel like you've left your prospect hanging? And they're like, ideally, your prospect is stuttering with you, right? Like that's the ideal situation.
I think you make a huge point, right? If you're not prepared, that's one thing. If it's just something that comes out naturally, it's another. So I think that's a huge point. You don't have to be too critical of yourself, because I go back and I listen, to my podcast. I know you're like, well, I move on, but I listen, especially, when it comes down to trying to grow, because I'm just tough on myself and I want to make sure that I grow. All right, so let's go prospecting. Let's switch some gears here.
Cool.
Okay, we're going to talk prospecting and key elements on your philosophy and what you think are the most important for a sales professional out there these days. Listen, there's a lot of avenues. We have the LinkedIn, we have the phone call, we can cold. Talk to me, because I want to talk about call reluctance.
Okay.
What's your perspective on somebody who's struggling with call reluctance, or maybe doesn't even realize they're struggling with call reluctance? But let's just talk about prospecting as a whole. What's your perspective on that?
You have to be someone worth talking to, and you have to have something worth talking about. And if you don't believe those two things, you'll never pick up the phone.
All right, play that back, everybody. Just do a quick rewind and say that again, because it's so basic, but yet so complex, right? I mean, but it's the truth. It's you just nailed it.
The really three key elements to prospecting are your relevance, your credibility, and your level of personalization. If you don't have something worth talking about, if you're not reaching out with any relevant topic, there's no reason for anybody to even pick up the phone. Yeah. Secondary to that, if you're not the person to talk to or a person to talk to about that relevant topic, maybe you've introduced something worth talking about, but why should they talk to you? It's important that you have some expertise and some branding, or, people talk a lot about personal brands. Like, okay, why would I talk to you about this? Right? Okay, yeah. Great. This is something I should be thinking about, but why are you the person to talk to?
Yeah.
And then the third tier to this is personalization. And personalization is getting a lot more attention now. And Google and Yahoo are changing their email rules, and they're kind of vacillating back and forth about what those should really look like. And it's kind of frustrating. But I think the key is, and the thing that we need to remember is that spray and pray at scale is not going to work as well for as many people for much longer. There are going to be some places it always works for. And it has always worked to an extent because if it didn't, then they wouldn't keep doing it. Right.
Yeah.
But the thing is, personalization in the absence of any credibility and relevance means nothing. Not going to get a call back, right? A relevant talking point without any credibility, not going to get a call back, right? So the first thing that we need to do is nail the relevance. I'm calling you because this fill in the blank issue matters to businesses like yours.
Yeah.
Got your attention, right? Credibility is the next line in the framework anyway. I've helped companies like yours solve these issues. I have expertise I'm willing to share, right? And then the personalization part is, and I noticed you worked in this company for so long, or you in a press release, you mentioned recently, your company mentioned recently that you're tackling this issue. I thought it might be poignant right now to speak about this, right? But like I said, the example with personalization, if you look at my LinkedIn profile and recognize that I went to Central Michigan University and got a Bachelor of Science in Sports Medicine. Like, okay, what do you want to talk about though? Like, because I don't live in that world anymore. So you can't assume the credibility or the relevance. Same thing. When I've got a client that says, well, we've done business with this Fortune 50 company. And would you like to talk to us about how we could help you too?
Yeah.
It's like, okay, for some people who are adjacent to that Fortune 50 company, that's going to be like, well, if you worked with them, you can work with us. Let's talk. But for some other places, it's going to be like, okay, great. You're credible, I guess, but I don't know why we should talk.
Yeah. Why should we be talking? Right. And then they want to lead with how great their company is, or they're great. It's all you start. The first step, I really want to make sure we dig into this.
Sure.
You've got to lead with the company's challenge. You've got to lead with challenges and understand their industry, right? You have to, when you're opening up and speaking with someone, they have to know that you're speaking their language too. I really impress this upon people when they're making a first call or they're reaching out to somebody cold. Understand their business and lead with challenges that they have in their organization so you can get their attention. Don't talk about how great your company is or how great what you do, because again, or who you work with, because that may hold a little bit of weight, but ultimately you've got to get their attention when it comes to from the start versus talking about yourself. So I think that's great.
Well, it's, you look at all the data that's out there. 3% of the market's ready to buy right now, and they're in a process. Another 7% is going to be buying in the next cycle, typically the next couple of months. Another 30% are not ready to buy, but they're problem aware.
Yes.
So if you lead with a conversation or a request for a conversation about a relevant problem that 40% of the market is aware of, and you demonstrate that you are a person who can help them understand that problem better, even if even if they don't buy something from you, you're going to score a whole lot more meetings. If you had brand dominance in something and it was a problem that the market associated with themselves, who doesn't pick up the phone when Elon Musk wants to talk about electric cars? Right? And let's try to separate Elon from his own celebrity. And like, I'm not his biggest fan in the world, but it's hard to ignore what he's doing.
Of course.
So when someone is unequivocally the category leader in their particular field and they address a problem you have, you are going to be willing to pick that person's brain for 30 minutes. Right.
Yep.
And maybe we're talking about a little bit of an extreme, because you don't have to be the absolute category leader, number one person in your field in order to be credible. Right. But at that extreme, if we're going to prove a point, if you had definite relevance and definite credibility, it's probably worth a phone call to at least 40%. 40% of the people you're trying to call if you have the right product market fit. So we're assuming product market fit. We're assuming relevance that goes along with that, and your branding and credibility that you're worth a discussion. If you're not getting a decent amount, if you're not getting 20% connect rate, and I'm not saying 20 out of 100 people you pick up the phone and call are going to pick up at that point. I mean, through a sequence, if you're not getting some sort of response rate, you're missing relevance or you're missing credibility. And the way you get through to more people is by personalizing that enough to where you're cutting through the noise and they know that it's you, right? But you got to get all three of those bubbles in the Venn diagram pretty well dialed in order to be effective. And what people do is they look at that, and companies look at that and they say, oh, that's way too much work. I'm not interested in doing that. Let me just call 1,000 people and see if 3 of them or 3% of them are ready to buy right now.
Let's see what sticks, right? Let's see what sticks. We talked about this, and this is great because you touched on numbers. How important are measuring metrics?
How important are measuring metrics?
Measuring metrics.
The most important metric you can measure is revenue.
Okay.
So if the revenue number is high enough, the other ones don't really matter. But when we're trying to reverse engineer what revenue is so we can do so repeatably and scalably, it's pretty important to have the data.
Do you see a lot of professionals out there? Sorry to cut you out, but do you see a lot of professionals out there who are not measuring their metrics?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I see a lot of them. Sometimes it's because they don't know what to measure. Okay. Sometimes it's because since we can measure everything, we want to measure everything. So the opposite is true. Yeah. And then you get bogged down in the weeds, right? And then, I think in order to build any kind of scalable process, and by scalable, again, I just mean repeatable. If it's repeatable, we can talk about it being scalable. But when I say scalable, and I include myself in this until really just recently when I started redefining for myself what scalable means. Scalable doesn't mean you need to replicate yourself and take this business to the moon, right? I mean, I'm a freelancer more than I'm an entrepreneur. I'm moving from one gig to the next, multiple gigs at a time because I have the capacity for it. But I'm currently not building a business that I can sell to somebody else or pass over to my kids, right? I think I'm good at what I do. I think there's people who need what I provide, and I sell my services, for those things. I'm not trying to build a lasting company. You don't have to be, though. You still need to know what your process is so that you know what to focus on, so that you know what the leading indicators of success are going to be, so you can make sure you're doing the right things the right amount of times to get some sort of, reasonable result. And again, you go back to the top of the show, you mentioned process. You focus on a process, you'll get results. When you focus on results, you get frustrated. So if you can fall in love with the process, you can be fulfilled by work, and you can also trust that the results are going to come, that the numbers, the math, the revenue is going to be there. If you're a salesperson and you're just focused on the fact that you haven't made a sale, which means you haven't cashed a commission check, it's really hard to do the right things. Because you're getting emotionally invested in the result instead of emotionally invested in the work.
Right.
And
the process.
And it sounds so stoic and hooey-gooey and whatever, just focus on the grind. And listen, it can be a grind. I don't like focusing on the fact that it's a grind. I like finding fulfillment in moving forward. Yeah. And that helps me manage my own expectations. It has helped me balance. It has helped me understand when enough is enough. It has helped me understand when it's not enough. Yeah. And that kind of perspective is invaluable in a sales game. And it's counterintuitive because selling is a results-oriented game. And so if all that matters are the results, how do we focus on anything other than the results? Well, if you want to keep your sanity, that's how you do it. Because the inputs lead to a reliable output. It's not about focusing on that output.
Yeah. And I think one thing to add to that too, is it helps you figure out where to put pressure, right? I mean, if you're struggling closing deals, but you're okay. And again, this is very broad, but if you're having a success setting appointments, but you're having trouble closing deals, well, then it gives you an idea of where to put pressure and where to improve your game. But again, if you don't have the process in place, and I want to talk about that next, then you're just kind of punching water too, right? I mean, there's certain things you can do, but if you don't really have a structured process, then you're never going to be able to maximize your performance and really dial in where you need to improve. And I want you to touch on the process, sales framework.
Well, before I get to the sales process, I want to mention something that you just said, because I find that a lot. And I want to plant a little seed in the back of the brains of your listeners right now.
Yes.
If you can open meetings, but you can't close them, you have an open problem. You have an opening problem if you are opening meetings that you can't close. You do not have a closing problem. You have an opening problem.
I like it.
If you are not opening meetings for the right reasons that are relevant to your client, but they're taking your meetings anyway, the reason you can't close is because you haven't opened right. And the amount of people that get to the goal line and are like, well, wait a second, everything was good until they asked for a 20% discount in order to get this done. I'm like, yep, you did not establish enough value from the beginning. Yes. It's not that you can't close. And I wrote this several years ago. It's just a white paper. It's on my website if you want to go find it. It's called You Don't Have a Closing Problem. And it is the 17 problems that you have that do not say closing in them. But if you got the other 17 pieces of the puzzle in place first, that last piece of closing is really easy to put in. But if you don't get the rest of them, the fewer of the steps you get leading up to closing, the fewer of those steps you get right, the harder it is to close. Closing is the simplest part of the process.
Right. It's about all the steps in the process and building value up in that. I'd love to dig into those 17. So everyone check out, we're going to get people directed to your website at the end of this thing. But yeah, listen, that's fantastic.
But it relates to process too. So let's work backward from a desirable outcome. Let's work backward from a signature on the proverbial line that is dotted, right? Thank you, Alec Baldwin. Mitch and Murray sent him from downtown.
Coffee is for closers.
It is.
Put
but
that coffee down.
I'm gonna have to watch that movie this weekend now.
I love it.
But working backward from a desirable outcome, what do we need? We need engaging messaging. We need attention. We need a gap between where they are right now and where they want to be. We need the tension or the group of emotions that go along with that gap. Yeah. We need good messaging. We need good alignment between the value we provide and the problems we solve. We need a lot of those things. But when you look at the sales process, how do we make sure that we are doing things in accordance with providing that value throughout? Right. And, I have this conversation with my clients all the time. Some people say that selling is a science. Some people say it's an art. Some people say it's a combination of the two. I believe it's a combination of the two, and which is what makes it a craft, really.
Right.
But the science of selling is your process. These are the things that have to happen. And there are 4 major steps in the seller's process. 1, you identify who you can help. 2, you get their attention. 3, you communicate your value. 4, you ask for next steps. That's it.
That's it.
Sometimes the next steps mean getting their attention again. And by getting their attention, I mean a meeting on their calendar. Okay. Sometimes you get to the next step or you communicate your value at that meeting and you say, hey, I think it makes sense for us to have another meeting in a week or so, this time with your other stakeholders here or the person who signs the check or whatever, right? We need to get more people involved. It's clear there's a problem. It's clear you own the problem, but who else needs to be involved in order to build consensus and get this deal across the line? We need to have that meeting. Okay, so the next step is scheduled and we're going to communicate our value again. Eventually, that next step is, hey, Dave, you think it makes sense to start? Now we've completed the process and we've opened the relationship, right? And so those are the only 4 steps that there are. The art part are your methods. So if the process is the science, your methods are the art. And that's how I marry the two. You can do it any way you want, so long as you're working toward the fulfillment of the process. If you like to prospect by using the phone, then God bless you, keep doing it because it works for you and it's hard. If you prefer to prospect, via email, well, then God bless you, keep doing it because it's hard. But the argument between, well, email's better than phone, phone's better than social, well, all politics are local. If it works for you, do it. I don't care. You know what I want? Appointments. It gets back to your point about measuring, what matters, right? How many appointments do we need to end up with qualified opportunities? And then how many of those qualified opportunities are going to lead to a reasonable amount of sales?
Oops.
We work backward from success. And understanding the difference between the science and the art, I think, is a key distinction that a lot of people miss. I don't care how you do it. I care that it gets done. As a matter of fact, I want you to do it in a way that is different from everybody else because I want you to lean into your unique skills, your unique talents, your unique capabilities. And I want you to use those unique attributes to feel really good about what you do, because that gets back to what I talked about at the top of this episode, is belief. When you feel you're doing it in a way that only you can do it, that feels good to do, you're more likely to do it. And you're also more likely to succeed. So when you do something more successfully, more often, it starts to look like exponential growth, Dave.
Yep.
But if you're trying to pigeonhole yourself into some walled off process that boxes you into a corner, makes you feel like you got to turn into another person in order to sell, that is your path to mediocrity right there. And nobody listens to a podcast like yours and wants to be mediocre.
Big point here is getting the reps. Okay, because there are so many avenues, and you're right, and we see this, right? I see this. Companies have this box or this formula that they think everybody just can fit into. Mm-hmm. And I'm all for structure. Don't get me wrong. I love structure, mm-hmm. But we also have to understand that sales professionals and people who are listening to this, we're all human. We have different mm-hmm. personalities. So if there's anything that I would add to what you just said or want someone to take away from is, there's no wrong way to do things, because if you're getting results, keep doing it. But the other side of this too is that you have to try different things and give yourself enough reps to measure it. Because if you do it 5 or 6 times and it doesn't work, I took one of Dave's processes or Jeff's processes and I tried it like 3 or 4 times and it didn't work. And that's one thing. You really have to go through that awkward stage and then this sort of mechanical stage, and then you move to a higher level. But ultimately, you have to get enough reps. And that's what it comes down to.
The experiment needs repetition. The experiment needs validation. And most people who, well, maybe not most people. I don't know that that's a fair statement. I will say that I took a statistics class, a very low level business class that had a little bit of stats in it. Actually, no, now that I think about it, it wasn't even a business class. My degree was in sports medicine, but as part of my degree, I had a course that taught a little bit of research. So in that research, we learned a little bit about statistically significant research. The N has to be big enough, right? An N of 1 is not statistically significant. But when you talk about testing and experimenting, talk about the art of selling. A key tenet of art is you being willing to push publish or push send or ship this art while saying, this might not work. If you're not willing to do something that might not work, you are not willing to succeed. We go back to, well, I use Dave's process or I use Jeff's process or whatever. If there were one way to do it, hell, if there were 5 ways to do it and everybody did it those 5 ways, we'd have a lot of consistent, reliable, replicable results. And that would be great. There's a lot to be said about consistency. Okay. But what we would also have is the very definition of mediocrity. If everybody did it the same thing, the same way, it would literally be mediocre. As consistent as it is, there would be no bell curve whatsoever, and it would be boring.
Yep.
That is the definition of what AI can replace for us.
There you go, right? There you go.
Okay. That's what people aren't talking about, is AI coming and taking away all of our jobs and doing our jobs for us and everything. Well, yeah, if you're mediocre, it's going to do exactly that. But when you bring your own magic to the table, AI will never be able to replace that.
Yeah.
And
man,
maybe I should never say never. Maybe math will work for me. And,
right.
100 years from now, AI will figure out how to create its own AI, and we'll all have bigger problems than what to do for a living, Dave. So I'm not even worried. If the thing that we're so worried about isn't even the biggest problem created by that situation, then I'm not interested in worrying about it. So you get back to the art part, you get back to the science part, you get back to not distilling yourself to the lowest common denominator.
Yeah.
This is hard because it requires guts. It requires you to trust yourself. It requires you to have enough ego to believe that it's worth trying something new, but enough curiosity to believe that you may not have it all figured out.
Yeah.
That's the point. And if you can wrap your brain around that, which is much easier said than done, it's something I've been working on for the last 15 years, and I am still working on it every day.
You got to keep working on it. And you use the word mediocrity because this is my phrase. Mediocrity is the silent killer. It is. Mm-hmm. It's a silent killer. So one of the things that I always try to impress upon anybody developing personally or professionally is don't be ordinary. Mm-hmm. Don't be ordinary. And the way that you do that is just what you talked about. You've got to understand that there are some things that are going to work and there are other things that are not going to work, but you really got to give them a try. And once you have that understanding and you do have something that works, it really qualifies it when you're trying to do new things in the future. But you got to take those chances and don't be ordinary. Don't be ordinary.
If you try to please everybody, you will thrill nobody.
Well said, man.
And nobody pays more. No, people pay more to be thrilled. They don't pay more to be pleased.
Well, you get them all, man. That's a good one.
Oh, that's a new one. That was stream of consciousness. That was just for you, Dave.
That's good.
That was my gift to you for playing.
All right. That one's marked. Mark that one. Play that one back too. All right. Let's talk about, you work with a lot of organizations. I want to flip this a little bit and go into now the organizations you work with. I've run companies. I've started companies. I know you work with a lot of organizations when it comes to putting together a really good sales organization. I know this is going to be a broad question, okay, but I want you to answer it the best that you can. What are the big differences between companies who thrive in sales outside of product? Listen, there's some products out there, Jeff, that, again, they're just on the market. They're hot. You can sell for a while, but eventually that evolves anyway and that turns. But the companies that have been around for a while or ones that are even starting up that have been successful, what are the differences in the weaker organizations, sales organizations, and the stronger ones that you've worked with? Can you give any identifying differences?
Clarity.
Yeah.
Clarity around product market fit. Clarity around ICP and who that market is. Clarity around roles and responsibilities. I have what I call the 7 steps to sell like you.
Yeah.
And they work for the individual. They also work for the organization. There's slightly different approaches to the same theme. Do you know yourself? Do you know your best customers? Right. Well, I can put them into 7 questions, but the 7 steps to sell like you are: know yourself, know your best customers, know your process, know your methods, know your rules. Be held accountable. Keep your swagger. So if you know who you are and you know who your best customers are, you're going to go a long way. Especially if you know the why. And I don't just mean the personal characteristics. I mean, like, who are we as a company? What do we provide? Why are we different? Why are we meaningful? Why are our customers better off for working with us than anybody else? And then when you go into knowing your best customers, it's demographics, it's psychographics, it's the whole ICP, in ideal client profile. And then, getting a little bit of feedback directly from, interviewing your best customers. Yes. Right. I mean, that part is really vital, because that's the interplay between those first 2 steps, if you will, is incredibly vital. The rest is academic, but those first 2 are successful companies get those right. Wannabe companies think that those things aren't important.
Yeah, I think you just nailed it right there. That's a big difference in those two steps, is identifying that from the get-go. I see a lot of companies that don't even have a customer profile or understand who they help, how they can help, and who they can help, or an ideal customer for that matter. So I think that's a huge point. Sorry to cut in on it. Go ahead.
No, that was. Sometimes I need that because I can ramble on this stuff forever, Dave. So thanks for cutting me
great.
off. Yeah, I think, but the process, the methods, the rules, there are more ways to do it right than to do it wrong. So that part is, hey man, drink what you like and like what you drink, man.
Yeah.
Go ahead. I don't care what it is. The accountability part it goes along with that clarity. I think that's something that is underrated. Can you have a colleague look you in the eye and ask you if you did your job? Not because they're trying to micromanage you, but because they care about you. They believe you can succeed, and they want you to know that they're looking out for you. And, then the swagger piece is the mindset. That's, we've talked about this. It's hard. It's hard. Do you have your perspective set appropriately? Are you focused on the process instead of the results? Are you seeing the opportunities in every obstacle? Do you recognize that the peaks and valleys are there to remember that we have valleys and peaks? Because if everything was a win, it would not have any purpose. And if everything was a loss, it'd be completely demoralizing and pointless. In either way, you'd either be bored or dead. So it just doesn't make any sense, to not appreciate one for the other.
I think the accountability thing, again, I cut in because you just spark these things with me, and I'm you said this, and I agree 110% on this. Accountability has this negative connotation or this threatening connotation, right? In the business world. And actually accountability is not even probably, excuse me. Accountability is the thing that elevates our performance. We have to have benchmarks. We have to have a place to go. I mean, if there's no accountability, then why do this for that matter? So I really liked what you said about accountability being such a positive in the sales space, or in any part of your life. I think it's huge. So
there is not a human being out there who wouldn't perform better if they knew that there was someone else out there looking after them for their own best interests. Accountability is love. Accountability is support. Accountability is underscoring and making more indelible the fact that this means something. Accountability is validation that you're doing something important. It's not micromanagement. Micromanagement is, hey, I don't trust you. Micromanagement is a lack of trust. Accountability is love. Accountability is I believe in you, and it's important. So if you're not getting it done, I want to know how I need to help. Because it's not like you to fail. And if you're failing or falling short in any way, it might be because of something completely out of our control. So if it is objectively something completely out of our control, then I'm going to be the person to validate that it wasn't you, that maybe we need to defend against something that we didn't defend against this time. But things like this are going to happen that are out of our control. And either we write them off as just random events, or we defend ourselves against this kind of thing from happening in the future. But in either way, we are better prepared to go succeed the next time when we try again, because we're going to try again because I believe in you and we both know this is important. That is a completely different conversation than, hey, make sure you fill out the CRM, Dave, so I know what you do every day. Okay. And that's where the disconnect happens. And most people, conflate those two terms. They are not the same.
Yeah. And great leaders and great sales leaders, whether you're leading an organization or whether you're leading a team, it is the truth. We always want to impress this upon the people we're leading. If we're holding you accountable to making an action, it's to help you. It's to help It's actually to help that leader or help that professional better understand what's going on with that individual. Again, individuals we talked about earlier, everybody's wired differently, may struggle with things differently. But it helps the professionals who are leading the charge for the company or in a place of leadership or management to better coach and better train your people. And I think that's where the science is lost, is that messaging. If you're really sincerely going in and asking for certain action items, then you should be doing it because it's going to help them. And if you can convey that, then you get a much better culture in your teams and your development. So I think that's extremely important. Extremely important. All right, man. Listen, wow, I can't believe it. It's almost.
I told you, I warned you. So we may have to do a Kiss Alive double album.
Yes.
Because you give me a microphone and you ask me good questions, I will talk. I warned you.
Here's the deal. I had because I always like to prepare for the podcast. I'm telling you, I think we got to a third of the questions I wanted to ask, and I don't say this in a bad way at all, a negative way. This is fantastic stuff that we're throwing out there. And you're right, we could do a live double album. So here's what I will say. Here's what I would ask you. I'd love to have you back on the show. I'd love to have you back. And we'll great. And have you back at some time in the near future to keep building on this, because there's so much more I'd love to unpack as we go along here. But your experience, your process, your delivery, again, I know, I'm not even going to say I think, I even should use that word, think. I know you're helping people. I know you're helping professionals. I know you're helping them out there. I see the content that you put out. And I know this space up and down, back and forth. And I just want to tell you, I appreciate the work you're doing for people out there. It's great stuff. And if you haven't checked this guy out, Jeff, where can people find you?
JeffBajorek.com.
Yeah.
Probably the best place. LinkedIn might actually be the best place because I update that one way more often. So just LinkedIn at Jeff Bajorek. That's probably a good place to find me. And I've got the Why and the Buy podcast is out there. That is going to be hosted for probably a couple more months. We hung that podcast up a little while ago, and I reprised my own podcast with Rethink the Way You Sell. So that one is up there too. So if you're curious to listen to me, that's a good place to go. The Why and the Buy lives on YouTube now, but JeffBajorek.com or
Great.
get a hold of me on LinkedIn and I'll point you in the right direction.
You have any projects or things coming up you want to share? Anything at all?
All kinds of projects.
Yeah.
All kinds of projects. Working on in the ideation right now with my podcast producer, actually, for the next iteration of what Rethink the Way You Sell looks like. It's already on YouTube. It's already in podcast form, but we're going to do something much more dynamic and like you've never seen in the sales improvement space. So it's going to be really engaging, really interesting, a lot of fun, and probably more work than I realized to put it on. But we're having a good time with it. That's great, man. That's great. Well, listen, I want to thank you again for being on the show. You've been a fantastic guest. And again, going back to what I said earlier, keep doing what you're doing, man, because you're putting out some great stuff. You're helping people in the professional sales space. And I appreciate it, really having you here. So check us out at salesproformance.com and like this, subscribe, share it. Again, Jeff, thanks again. And we'll see you next time. Appreciate it. Thanks, man.